everyone. Thanks for spending a little bit of your Friday with us. Today, I want to talk about modules. Now, as Bonnie's kind of implied, I'm an old man and I've been writing PowerShell code for a very long time. And I have kind of learned a few things along the way. It's not always, though, gospel. So even though I have done something, doesn't necessarily mean it's the way that you should do it. However, maybe something that I'm doing might spark an idea, go, oh, I hadn't thought about it that way. So I'm not really going to give you necessarily any earth-shattering experiences about building modules, but maybe I'll get you to think about the whole process in a slightly different way. So the time comes around and say, hey, you know what? I want to make a PowerShell module. So what is the first thing that you do? Well, for me, I build what I call a module structure. Now, there have been times where I will build a module and it's based upon some code that I've already written, years ago. And I thought, oh, you know what? I only flesh that out. But if I can, I try to start from scratch and build a structure. Now, you remember, for those of you who have built modules, a module is just a set of PowerShell files. You follow a certain naming convention for the manifest and the folder and the root module typically, certainly the other variations that you can do. But that module is just a structure, a skeleton of files and folders. How you structure those files and folders could have implications on how you build, maintain, or troubleshoot that module. And that's kind of what I want to talk about a little bit here. So the real question becomes, is there a right way to build a PowerShell module? Yes. No. You know what? I'm going to sound like your mom. It depends. Okay. So it's this whole it depends thing that I want to talk a bit about. When the time comes that you want to design a module, one of the things you might have to think about, because it will have an impact on what you do. In fact, a lot of the questions I'm going to go through here, they're meant to be rhetorical, but they're also meant for you to be something to consider. Maybe you haven't thought about it because there's implications to how you answer this. Are you building a module with maybe 2 commands? Or are you building a module with 20 commands? Or 200 commands? Or are you building something as complex as the Azure set of modules, right? So building a module with 2 commands is going to be very different, for me anyway, than building a module with 50 commands. So what's going to be in your module? Typically, we're writing modules because we're going to export commands. We're going to make them available, make them public to the user. However, you may need to use private commands, hidden commands, or functions, helper commands, that's what I refer to them as, that you use to build your module. So you can have a public command that's running, get foo, but then under the hood, within the code for that module, it's calling some private command that can be in your module. Are you going to need any of those in your module? Now, for me, this is a real biggie. Now, I work at home. I'm working by myself, so I don't think too much about this. However, I have to remember, a lot of you may work in a corporate environment. You're building a module. Are you building the module and working completely on your own? Or are you building something in a team environment where lots of other people might be contributing code and functions and files or pester tests or whatever? That too can make a difference on how you might want to structure your module. Now, this should be, again, a rhetorical question. Will you be writing pester tests? I mean, of course you should be, but maybe you aren't. I have plenty of modules that are small and simple enough. I don't bother writing pester tests because I can quickly test or verify in other ways that my code is good. However, if you are going to be writing pester tests, how are you going to be running those tests? What kind of testing framework do you have? This becomes an issue or not an issue, I should say, but this becomes something to think about, because are you wanting to test on a per file level, per command? This comes back to, are you working alone or in a team? Maybe someone is writing the file and they're going to do all their testing separately, and you're just going to merge everything together in the final module, or you're going to test everything together. I don't have an answer here. This is just, again, I want you to start thinking about some of these things that maybe you hadn't thought about before. Will you be writing help documentation? Again, that's kind of a rhetorical question, because yes, you should be. How you write that help documentation, I'm going to show you my example where I use the Platypus module. Does that help documentation need to be localized? Do you need to, are you supporting a module that has to have help documentation in English and in Spanish, or just English? That also might affect how you lay out your documentation, or even what documentation tools you're using. Maybe you're not using Platypus. Maybe you're using something else, or you've written your own documentation tools. Do you need to create additional files? Remember, a module can include not just functions, but you can include custom format extensions and custom type extensions. Those are PS1 XML files typically. Do those have to be published? How are you going to maintain and manage those files? That would be something else to think about. What are you doing for source control? Are you using Git or team services or something else? Now, a lot of people seem to be using Git and then publish to GitHub or something like that, but that too can affect how you lay out or what you need to do in order to build your module structure. So these are just a number of the questions that you kind of want to think about when comes time to say, we're going to build a module. Well, don't just open up Visual Studio Code and start cranking away. Think about what you are trying to do. So modules have functions. We just saw a talk about creating functions. Well, when you're creating your functions for your module, you have a decision to make. Do you put those functions all in the Psm1 file, the module file, which could be your root module? In some ways, this is a very easy thing to do. Oftentimes, I'll start with a function in a PS1 file. I'll work on it and go, no, you know what, let me add this other function. And then I think, I need to make this a module. The simplest thing to do, just change the file name from PS1 to Psm1, done, you have a module. I can add a manifest, put it in a folder. I have a better structured module. This comes down to my first question, how many functions do you have? If I have a module that has 2 functions or 3 functions, yeah, maybe in a Psm1 file is just fine. I probably don't want to do that for 50 functions and load them all up in one file. So maybe I put them in a single external file, functions.ps1. And that has all my functions. Or let's say, again, it's 50 files. Do they need to go into separate files? Do they need to go into groups of separate files? Do I use a subfolder or some other sort of folder hierarchy for those commands? These answers could come back based on your original assertion of, yes, I'm doing this in a team environment. We're going to have 50 commands. We're doing pester tests, and so we need to structure it in this way. That's why I say there's no one right answer or one right way to build a module. There are things that you need to think about, and all of these have implications as to how you make your module easier to manage, easier to develop, and easier to maintain. Oh, and what about private functions? Same idea. Do they go in a single file? Do you put them in the PS1 file? Do you use folders? Same things, because those have to be pester tested as well. And you might want to test the whole module as well. So you have to kind of think about these things as you're deciding what you want to do. Oh, and of course, then what editing tool? Are you using VS Code? Are you still stuck using the PowerShell ISE? Or are you using, say, Sapiens PowerShell Studio? Or some other tool, Notepad++? That might make a difference as to how you manage the files. Maybe it's just as easy to put everything in the Psm1 file or one single file, because then you can just see everything and work everything in one file. Where something like VS Code, it's really easy to see the file structure, say, oh, I want to work on this file, and I want to work on this file. Something that might affect what you decide or how you decide to structure your module. So with all of that, let me show you some code and show you some of my modules. And I'm going to also show you a script that I have that I'm going to probably start using to provision new modules for myself. So let me bring up. All right, so I'm just going to leave the slides up, and I'll bring up the IC here because it's an easier demo tool for all of this, if I can type without hitting my hands with a microphone. So I have all my files and folders are all under C scripts. And I'll show you, I have a module, it's out in the PowerShell gallery, called PS Script Tools that has a lot of tools that I use for making my life easier in PowerShell. So let's do quickly here, show tree. So you can see, and I use, this is because it's still on GitHub, I use Git for source control, and I use VS Code. So I have a relatively simple folder structure, and maybe doing a directory listing might be a little bit easier. All right, so here you can see that I have my PS Script Tools as the module name. So that's the folder. And I have the manifest, and I have the module name. We'll get through some of the other files. And you can see here my folder structure. I think what I'm going to do is I have this open here in VS Code. So let's go into VS Code. Make this a little bit bigger. Now, the nice thing about VS Code is I can see the whole folder structure. So here is the manifest. You've all seen what a module manifest looks like. And I have my root module. Now, one thing I should mention about this particular module. A lot of this module grew out of commands that I have been developing over the last 10 years. And in the last couple of years, I decided to start consolidating them into a single module. So I have, the structure for this is slightly different than what I might use with something else. And maybe that's going to be true of you because you're going to have stuff that just kind of grows organically. So the Psm1 file has a couple of things here I want to point out. All of my functions are all under a functions directory. So as you can see, I have a lot of commands here. Now, technically, some of these files, like locations.ps1, nope, that just has one. Here we go, utilities. So here's an example where I have a single file, but it has multiple functions in it, but they were all kind of related. I think this file originally came from some other project and I just kind of merged it in here, but other things that I've added since then, like this ps-who command, I just wrote a single file. You can see this actually originated as a gist. I just created a single file with the single function. That way, I can, if I need to modify something, I can just modify this single file and not worry about mucking up something else that might have other things in it. Another option to think about is code signing. Now, I don't sign any of my codes that I publish up on GitHub because it's all, for all practical purposes, it's reference and educational material. It's all under an MIT license, so you can try it and all of that. However, you might also take that into account. If you have lots of commands in one file, decide, oh, I got to fix this line in one file, you have to go through the effort of re-signing that file. Now, normally that should not be a big deal, but maybe re-signing code is a task that has to be done that's a little more onerous in your environment. So deciding how you're going to structure files based on code signing requirements, again, is something else to possibly think of. So in the Psm1 file, and most of you probably have done stuff like this, I basically have to dot source every function. And then when I import the module, I get all of the functions. The manifest then includes handling what files are going to be, or what functions are going to be exported. This module also defines some variables. And so that's what the rest of this code in the Psm1 file. For some reason, I added this little function here to open a help file that I've started creating here. I've created a PDF of the README file, which is basically documentation. This could be part of the module as a separate file, but I think I put it in the module file itself because it's kind of a meta command, if you will. It's a command about the module. I'm gonna give you one other little tip here. Normally when you run import module -verbose, you get nothing. But I decided, you know what, I need for troubleshooting purposes, like maybe I need to make sure that I'm loading all the right files or whatnot. So I added a little trick here to say, hey, if I do import module pscriptools -verbose, I'm going to detect that I did that and then turn on verbose for the rest of the module. So when I do import module -verbose, all of my verbose messages in the Psm1 file work. Because normally you don't get verbose output with the Psm1 file. So if you need or kind of want that verbose output, that's a little handy trick for you. All right, so what else I want to show here? So the module also has, because it's on GitHub, I've got a README file. I have a license file. My functions are all there. This module also includes some format files. So I have all of those in a separate folder. You could dump all of this in the root of the module, but then to me, that becomes kind of a nightmare to manage. Not a big deal if you only have 2 files, but if I have 50 files or 100 files, then that's just kind of tedious to find what I want. The docs folder is where I keep all of the markdown versions that I create with the platypus module. So all my functions have markdown help, which then gets turned into official help in a culture specific folder, ENUS. And then I have obviously some GitHub stuff and the normal VS Code folder for my tasks and a few other VS Code related files. So that module, you know, kind of works nicely for me. Let's look at a different help here. Oh, one other note here. I also have a change log. So if you're going to be publishing a module in the gallery and have it up on GitHub or some other source control, I certainly encourage you to have some type of change log. The structure can be a text file. I've started liking mine in Markdown, just looks nicer to read on GitHub. So this then goes through and I have all of my change history. So that is a file that I use all the time. Let's look, I'm going to jump to another module. This is my PS Release Tools module that you can use to install PowerShell 7. Now, so this module is a little bit smaller, only has a handful of commands, but it's kind of structured the same way. So I have my README, I have my module file. Now, this particular module has all of the public functions, which are all in one file. And then I have a set of private functions, which again are all in one file. My private functions use non-standard names because no one's going to see them. And that's also a clue for me that if I'm running my code and I see the non-standard name, I know I made a mistake and I'm exporting something that shouldn't be exported. And of course, I have the documentation and the help files and my changelog. I also have, and you may need this depending on how you're going to publish this, you may have another folder like for images or assets. So my README file, for example, has graphics in it. And so those graphics are in the images directory. So when you look at the README on GitHub, you can see the nice, pretty pictures that I made. The last part, oh, I don't have it in, oh, I do, here we go, is tests. So you may also want to create a test folder for your pester tests. So I actually do have a set of pester tests for this module, which are all then created. So I have a directory structure that has all the files that I need. They're organized, and because I use VS Code as my primary editor, it's very easy to see and work with what I need. Something took me a long time to get used to until I finally figured out what's going on here. This little outline feature, if you're new to VS Code, because I have all these functions in here, I could just click on the function in the outline and it will jump to that. Once I discovered that feature, go, oh, that's awesome. I will be using that all the time. So something for you to keep in mind. So I have a variety of ways that I can create my functions. I can, in that particular case, I like keeping the private and public functions in separate files and separate folders. That makes it easier for me to make sure that they stay private and public. And it makes it easier for my testing. If I want to .source a particular file, I can do that either in VS Code or PowerShell IC or whatever. So what I need now is an easy way to create what's going to be, in essence, for me, my standard module structure. Because I don't want to have to go through and create all these things all the time. Now, I'm going to mention right now, because I'm not looking at the Twitch stream, but I'm sure someone's going to mention the Plaster module. Plaster would be a great tool to use in order to scaffold out a new project like a new module. That would be a completely different talk, so I'm not going to talk about Plaster, but that it is a possibility. Instead, I'm basically going to roll my own version kind of Plaster, and I have a script here that I've written called make module, which I'm kind of going to walk through and demo, and then you can decide how you want to use it. I have a link for this, so you'll be able to find this up on GitHub. So this is a PowerShell script. I kind of expect you to have the PowerShell get module. So the function is called do module base. And it takes as a parameter, mandatory parameter, the name of your module, a description. Optionally, you can specify the number of functions or the names of the functions that you intend to write. Whether you want your function to be core, desktop, or both. And I also have a switch here to create the GitHub repo. Sometimes I may create a function. I'm not going to put it up on GitHub. Other times I might want to. So I have a switch there to allow that. This function has a number of hard-coded values for me. So I basically wrote this for me. I'm going to share it with you, but know that this is not a production turnkey function. You will have to go through and edit to make it work for you. So I'm going to put all my modules go in the scripts folder. And I know that I always need folders. I always need a docs folder and my culture folder, an images folder, tests, my .vs code. I've decided I'm going to start doing more by having a functions directory. Now, whether I create a single function file or multiple, I don't know, but at least I have the folder. And the same thing with formats. If I need to have a format file, that's where I will put it. So I'm going to create those folders. I'm going to create the default README file. Now I have, for VS Code, I have my own tasks.json file that I use for all my modules, and also a markdown linting file. So I'm going to copy those to the VS Code directory that I create. I'm going to create my MIT license file. And then I'm going to create the module manifest. Now, I have all the parameters I need for the module manifest in the hash table here. You could also, and I do this for a number of other things, you could set some of these values with your PS default parameter values. But I'm going to create a new manifest based upon the module name that I specify. And I'm also going to create a Psm1 file. And in that Psm1 file, I have my little trick to do the verbose, and I have the code to .source each of the functions in the, each of the PS1 files in that functions folder. Now here's the fun part for me, and this is where Plaster makes things a little bit easier than the kind of the hard way I'm doing it here. If I specify a group of function names, I'm going to actually create an outline of that function. So I like a standard begin, process, and end, and I have kind of a standard write verbose that shows me that I'm starting the command. Oh, I'm gonna have to fix that. I copied and pasted and it fixed that. And ending the command. That way, when I run a function and I do dash verbose, because often my functions will call each other, I can see, oh, I'm in function A. Oh, now I'm calling function B. Now I'm back to A. Now I'm calling C. So having those little verbose begin and end have been really quite handy. So I then create my functions.ps1 file that has all of those in there. I create my change log. Now, because I had Git installed, I then can run Git. I can do Git init, set the path, add the files, do the initial commit. The last part is, if I want to, I can create a new GitHub repo. And I'll share with you my function to do that. You will need a GitHub user token, which you get through the developer side of GitHub. I'm not going to go through that function. But if I need to, I can say, yep, let me go ahead and create a new GitHub repo by calling my new GitHub repository function. And we use those parameters. Because I now have a GitHub repo, I want to add that to the private data in my module manifest. So I update the module manifest, add that code back to Git. And because I've created the GitHub repo, I now add the GitHub repo and push to that, and that does it. So let's give this a shot. Let me save my change. Run that to load it all in. Oh, actually, let's do this. I'm going to run this from PowerShell 5.1, from Windows PowerShell. So let's .source that there. And just so you can see here, let's get VS Code out of the way. So just as a refresher, there's the parameters that I want to specify. And I'm going to create a new module called PS Voodoo, set of PowerShell tools for practicing voodoo and other dark arts. And I know, when I build this function, it's going to include some commands called new hex, invoke spell, and remove curse. And I always try to do stuff both for core and desktop. And I want to create the GitHub repo. So let's do, and this will go by very quickly. New module base at new. So you can see it just really quickly created the folders. It created the files. And for some reason, I know GitHub continues to want me to log in. So hold on here while I log into GitHub again. And part of the demo gods I obviously did not appeal to. Because when I tested this last night, it said, oh, no problem, it just works, it's fine. And of course now it doesn't. I have to log in. And of course, because I am doing things the right way, I also have to do double credentials. All right, so I'm going to cancel out of that. So just jumping ahead here. So there's the PS Voodoo. So it actually kind of got created. Let's go back here. Let's do a directory listing. Of course, I didn't run this here. Right, so there are the files. In fact, let's open this up here in VS Code. You can see that I'm on Git. So I have a master. So there's my functions file. So I have each of my functions with my begin, process, and end blocks by default. So that's kind of ready to go. I have the change log. And in fact, if I were to come here and do so actually all of my commits all worked. Oh, let me see. Well, darn it. This normally should work just fine. My problem is I didn't want to go through the full process of completely logging into GitHub. So I haven't pushed the changes to GitHub to the upstream repo. And I created my repo, by the way, private. The command has a way of allowing you to create private or public repos. Now, what I could do, if I wanted to take my script a little further in order to scaffold or build everything up, I could actually even put in the placeholders for help. So I can do that by using the platypus module. So let's import the module. Right, so it's imported, and then I can create new markdown help. And then normally you would edit those, but let's go ahead and create the external help. And now if I rerun the import module, and look at help on one of the functions. There's my help. So the nice thing with the platypus module is it generates a markdown. You go in, basically fill in the blanks, put in an example, and you're done. Now I have a module that is ready to go. And as I said, the module is up on GitHub, although because I haven't fully gotten everything linked. Oh, let's see. Maybe I could still do that here. I may need to set the master git push you. Yep, and that's when GitHub wants me to log in. So I'm not going to fight with that during the demo. All right, so that's a look at a script that you could use to build a scaffolding for, or a structure for your module. Again, kind of based upon the needs that you might have in your organization. So in terms of resources, a lot of talk about modules and scripting in general is at the PowerShell scripting and toolmaking book that Don and I have up on LeanPub. I just did a huge revision to it. So if you are kind of new to scripting or want to learn more about modules or anything PowerShell toolmaking related, this would be the book to go to. My blog, I'm trying to get more active there. So if you want to learn more about PowerShell, that's kind of the place to go. As Bonnie mentioned, I have a lot of courses on Pluralsight, and plenty of other people, other speakers here also have courses on Pluralsight. So that might be something for you to take a look at. You can find me on Twitter. Again, my blog, my GitHub repo. The make module file, that function, is up on GitHub. It's at a gist, and you can use that bit.ly link if you want to grab the code. I also inserted a slides or PNG versions of my slides, such as they are. If you, for some reason, want to go back and refer to them, I will need to update the gist to fix the mistake about in my process block, or the end block, I should say. But that's a look about how you might want to build a module. The structure really depends upon what you need to do in your environment and how you need to meet your business needs, meet your boss's needs, meet your needs. The more planning I think you do up front, the easier and more fun you'll have building the module.